A new Ipsos poll conducted for Global News shows that the majority of Canadians support the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. Let's bring in our Legislative Bureau Chief Keith Baldry in Victoria for more on this. And Keith, a lot more support in BC than some might have thought.
Well, yeah, it follows a series of polls now, Sonia, that shows that support for Kinder Morgan pipeline in BC remains fairly consistent in terms of a majority backing the pipeline expansion project. So here's some of the numbers our Ipsos pollster turned up. 55% of British Columbians support the pipeline. Of that, 30% have very strong views on that. And in terms of opposition, 37% oppose it, and just 17% firmly oppose the pipeline. That shows you really where the anti-pipeline vote really is. It's quite low. On a breakdown of regions and parties, 57% again of Metro Vancouver residents and the interior residents support the pipeline. That's a bit of a surprise. I think opposition in Metro might have been considered higher than that. Even on Vancouver Island, 48% support the pipeline. That's more than the opposition. In terms of political parties, BC Liberals fairly strong in their support of the pipeline project, and even almost half of New Democrat voters say they support the pipeline as well. And in terms of how John Horgan's doing, he seems to be against the public opinion curve here. 48% don't think he's doing a good job in terms of how he's handled this pipeline issue, and just 39% think he's doing a good job on this. Even with these numbers, though, Sonia, even though with the majority supporting the pipeline, there remain serious concerns about environmental impacts, including a spill response strategy that is yet to be in place from Ottawa. I'll point our pollster Kyle Braid address when we talked to him this morning.
It doesn't matter whether you're a supporter or an opponent. Supporters themselves have their own concerns about the project. More than 6 in 10 British Columbians say that they are really worried about the idea of a tanker spill and damage to our coasts. And the one thing that British Columbians, they don't agree on a lot in this survey, the one thing that they agree on is that they would like to see the federal government do more, provide more money, more assurances that if there is a spill, that it can be dealt with and cleaned up. More than 8 in 10 British Columbians say that they support that, which is a sign that either people aren't aware of the federal government's ocean protection plan, or they just don't think it's strong enough.
All right, and Keith, you mentioned Premier Horgan. How does Trudeau fare in this poll?
Yeah, Justin Trudeau fares even worse than John Horgan on this, at least in British Columbia. 59% of British Columbians don't think Justin Trudeau's doing a good job on the pipeline issue. Just 31% think he's doing a good job. I guess the relief he can get out of this poll is 57% of residents in Metro support the project. That's where Justin Trudeau won basically almost all his ridings in the last election. But his own personal numbers not doing well, both provincially and federally as well. Back to you.
All right, Keith Baldry joining us from Victoria. Thanks, Keith.
Okay.
Government data that's never before been made public is painting a very different picture of how clean Canada's oil refining industry is compared to the U.S. The data obtained exclusively by Global News in partnership with the Toronto Star and National Observer shows a majority of Canadian refineries emitted more sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and carbon monoxides in 2014 than the U.S. average. In fact, Canadian refineries emitted so much sulfur dioxide that 15 plants in Canada polluted 62% more of it in 2014 than 127 U.S. refineries in the U.S. combined. The federal government has been made aware of the gap between us and the U.S. for more than 15 years and discussed imposing a cap on emissions. But despite 2 working groups, that's never happened.
The delays are with senior management and with the political level in terms of what they see as the priority of the day. Someone has to tell them it's a priority now. It's like, yeah, do it.
The Canadian Fuels Association, which represents the refining industry, points out that all of its facilities are in compliance with current laws and regulations, and many key pollutants have decreased up to 50% over the past 15 years. You can watch the complete investigation tonight on Global National.
Squeezing the heavy oil out of all that sand and clay is a dirty, expensive process, and for decades, most oil companies scoffed at the idea. Today, with the price of a barrel of oil approaching $100, there's a mad dash underway to extract every drop possible. Government is clearing the way, and oil companies are making billions of dollars, but neither seems to be keeping track of the staggering environmental costs of a modern-day black gold rush.
Many of us have no idea just what's inside the huge ships that move through our port, but there has been a quiet and rapid expansion in the number of crude oil tankers moving right through Burrard Inlet. Just this morning, another massive tanker leaving Kinder Morgan's Westridge terminal in Burnaby. This is where they fill up with crude oil coming by pipeline from Alberta. The ship will head to sea through this narrow passage on Saturday. That's the part that worries Bill Gannon. Big vessels, dangerous cargo, and so little room for error.
Why are we taking the risk, risking our whole environment?
Gannon is an accountant and longtime environmentalist. He's watched the tanker traffic increase from his Cole Harbour office. Crude oil exports through the Port of Vancouver have been happening for decades, but never like this. They've more than tripled in the past 5 years, with 65 tanker loads leaving in 2009. And Kinder Morgan plans to expand even more, with the long-term goal of more than doubling capacity on its crude oil pipeline. That's the pipeline that ruptured in 2007, sending oil raining down on people's homes and into Burrard Inlet. With the number of tankers growing so quickly, Gannon fears a spill is inevitable.
The fishing industry will be totally down the drain. The beaches, all our beautiful beaches are gone.
This is the Kinder Morgan tank facility on Sumas Mountain in Abbotsford. When the pipeline was built in 1953, not a lot of people lived here, but that has changed. And opponents say an expansion of this magnitude is just reckless.
Less than 100 meters.
John Vissers lives next door to the Kinder Morgan oil tank facility on Sumas Mountain. Every day, 300,000 barrels of oil flows through the Trans Mountain pipeline. Now Kinder Morgan wants to nearly triple that amount. Vissers says it's a reckless idea, especially with all the new development in the area.
They're talking about almost tripling the size of their facilities, and they're doing it right in the middle of a growing suburban area.
It's not a matter of if there's a spill, it's a matter of when there's a spill, and you only increase the likelihood of it as you increase the volume of traffic.
In 2007, a contractor ruptured the Trans Mountain pipeline in Burnaby, sending oil spewing into the neighborhood. And in January, there was a leak at Kinder Morgan's Sumas Mountain facility. The company says expanding the pipeline's capacity won't mean safety standards are compromised.
We're not going to jeopardize public safety by having a bigger project than a smaller project.
But John Vissers isn't so sure.
If something's wrong, we are supposed to alert them. And we believe, of course, it should really be the other way around. They should have electronic monitoring. They should have all sorts of safeguards in place. And they should be telling us if there's any problems.
Since I'm married into the family, I've always known it's been there.
This land has been in Don Forbes' family since the 1800s. A farm at first, it became a golf course in the 90s. Underneath the lush green, a pipeline.
Standing right here, we're right, you might line up those two markers there, we're right on top of the pipeline right here. So right now, 300,000 barrels a day is going underneath us.
It's been there since the 50s and is owned by Kinder Morgan. And Kinder Morgan is finalizing plans to build another pipeline along the old one. That means twice as much oil will pump through here. To build it, they would have to tear up his golf course, and there's nothing the family can do about it because Kinder Morgan owns the right-of-way.
I'm not particularly thrilled to have my business disrupted for how long, I don't know, and how we negotiate the restoration will be the big question. Do we get a bag of grass seed, or do they returf it, or what do they do?
See the distance between us?
This is about 60 feet.
That's how wide they can dig.
There's a lot of golf course. Won't be there for a while.
On everyone's mind what happened in Burnaby in 2007. Thousands of liters poured out when a Kinder Morgan pipe was ruptured. And in January, another leak, this time in Abbotsford.
If there's an oil spill on the west coast, it would have huge impacts on all life in the area. And of course, in a heavily populated area like the Metro Vancouver region, if there was an oil spill, it would have really drastic consequences potentially for human health.
Kinder Morgan line will go down here.
Chilliwack's mayor says there have been no issues in her town so far, but she will be watching carefully.
They need to consult, they need to look after the environmental safety, and they also need to think about how it would affect the life of the city when they're doing it.
Calls and email to Kinder Morgan were not returned, but the new pipeline is not a done deal. Once plans are finalized, it will go through a lengthy environmental assessment.
Kinder Morgan has big plans to expand its pipeline from Edmonton to the Burrard Inlet. That would mean we'd see a lot more oil tankers in this harbor. So the risk of an oil spill is a concern from increased tanker traffic, but that isn't the only issue. The possibility of actually dredging the harbor is highly controversial. A presentation to investors by the Kinder Morgan president revealed that would involve widening the channel by dredging. CTV News has learned the port is testing samples of sediment at the second narrows channel to prepare for possible dredging.
Dredging can be quite harmful. There's a lot of toxins, heavy metals, well above acceptable limits.
Kinder Morgan hasn't applied for a permit to dredge yet. Right now, it's accepting bids from companies prepared to buy oil from its pipeline, hoping to build a strong business case before it decides to apply to expand its pipeline. They look like blobs of tar. These rocks are on the shores of North Vancouver. The Tsleil-Waututh First Nation says it's crude oil from a spill going back to the 1950s. And just a few weeks ago, oil from a mystery spill was spotted on the shores of their reserve.
A heavy heart. Our inlet is in peril. It's dying.
That's why they're opposed to any plans to increase tanker traffic in Burrard Inlet.
The risk of having that much oil floating through our inlet, it's too great a risk to take.
Vancouver boasts the busiest port in the country, and as a nation that is a great exporter of oil, many of the ships you notice in the harbor are tankers. Last year, 65 tankers exported nearly 4 million tons of crude oil from the Westridge Marine Terminal in Burnaby. But pipeline giant Kinder Morgan is quietly planning an expansion that could lead to substantially higher tanker traffic and possibly greater risk.
It's the prospect that there will be more oil tankers of a limited size, and with more movement of oil tankers comes more risk.
Kinder Morgan has a pipeline running from Alberta to Burnaby with a capacity to carry 300,000 barrels per day. The company wants to expand, more than doubling its pipeline capacity. If that happens, oil tanker traffic would jump. And with the spill in the Gulf of Mexico, you can see why environmentalists would be concerned.
What we know about crude oil tanker traffic in water is the same as what we've been learning about the BP oil spill down in the Gulf, is that oil and water don't mix.
While Kinder Morgan asked for more time before commenting, Port Metro Vancouver issued a statement saying that protection of the environment is a top priority. We work closely with the marine industry and government to develop new and innovative ways to continually improve safety procedures. For Greenpeace, that's not good enough.
We can just look at just a few years ago, the BC ferry Queen of the North that sunk in northern British Columbia. That wasn't an error of technology, it was a human error. And so no matter what, there is no technology modern enough or good enough that is going to be able to protect our coastline.
According to this marine spill expert on Vancouver Island, our ability to deal with a large oil spill is inadequate. Our tugboat practices and guidelines are outdated, and our navigational risks are great.
There are some areas that are particularly problematic, like going through Herald Strait and down through, and that dog leg that's required there at Turn Point. It's very much of a choke point for other major vessels to come through. It has 6-knot currents.
Oh, wow. It breached. This is crazy. Unbelievable. Look at the amount of water. And that's just probably from this morning. This is where the pipe is, right in the middle of the reserve, the heart of the community. Back in 1952, our chief wasn't allowed to hire a lawyer. That paper was put in front of them and they were told to sign. Back then it was a $1,200 payment, one-time payment. It's an insult. It's a slap in the face to our people. third week of November, we should have had over 1.5 feet of snow. But you look at it now, it's unpredictable. That's the only reason why I could see that they would want to keep it above the reserve, which will impact our water aquifer, is because it's the cheapest route. To us, it's not about the money, it's about the water, our drinking water. And that's why the fight is on.
An update now on the flood situation across the province. There are 18 local states of emergency now in places across BC. Homes in a dozen communities are under evacuation orders, while people in 11 other jurisdictions have been warned they could be told to leave their homes at a moment's notice. The flood danger, a situation British Columbians will have to get used to, at least until the spring melt tapers off.
With flooding and fire events being the new normal, it's interesting to see the level of experience that's growing and people are more prepared. Of course, we could never be prepared enough. The level of cooperation between local governments and First Nations and the ministry staff has dramatically improved from last year's events, and that's really a positive thing, and I'm really happy to see that.
Over 4 years ago, it was a gusher that sent 227,000 liters of crude all over Inlet Drive and flowing down into Burrard Inlet.
Basically, it was about 30 to 40 feet in the air.
The pipeline was ruptured by a contractor hired by the city of Burnaby to build a storm sewer. Today, the contractor, an engineering firm, and the pipeline owner pleaded guilty to Environmental Act charges.
In asking for the penalties, the Crown Prosecutor says these were sophisticated organizations. They had the resources to do a better job. They simply didn't.
Prosecutors are seeking penalties of over $500,000. That's on top of cleanup costs topping $15 million. Pipeline owners Trans Mountain and operator Kinder Morgan have been talking about expanding the amount of oil going from the pipeline and to tankers in Burrard Inlet.
There is a huge concern about expanded use of that pipeline and expanded oil tanker traffic through the Burrard Inlet. There's so much pressure on these companies, because of the opposition to the Keystone XL pipeline in the United States, the Enbridge pipeline in the north. The Kinder Morgan company and the associated companies are actually, trying very quietly to increase the amount of oil that's moving through the Vancouver Harbour without the public ever having anything to say about it.
Ottawa will be an official intervener in the BC government battle over provincial control in the pipeline expansion. The federal government says it's confident in Parliament's rights and will defend its, quote, clear jurisdiction over interprovincial pipelines. Ottawa has given its approval to the Kinder Morgan project, while BC is trying to delay it.
Ottawa and Alberta over the potential of using tax dollars to fund the Trans Mountain pipeline.
The federal government and the government of Alberta have suggested they're going to take tax money and drive it into a pipeline. And I would suggest if we're going to be taking tax money and giving it to what is one of the most profitable sectors in the economy, the oil and gas sector, that we should be doing it with the view to helping people.
Two environmental activists have gone to extreme measures to draw attention to their opposition of the Kinder Morgan pipeline expansion. Two women using climbing equipment scaled a drill and refused to come down for most of the day. They say the piece of equipment is intended to be used to bore through Burnaby Mountain as part of the pipeline expansion project. Delta police were on scene but say the demonstration was peaceful.
This is a piece of equipment that Kinder Morgan was trying to hide. We actually tracked it all the way from Germany, and now we're letting the public know, because I think, the public cares about clean water, they care about Indigenous rights, they care about climate change, and this Kinder Morgan pipeline and tanker project endangers all of those.
The activists here today say they'll be monitoring the drill closely and plan on meeting the drill with resistance at Burnaby Mountain before it's put into use. The women came down from the drill voluntarily in the early afternoon.
The World Health Organization says air pollution still kills 7 million people each year, almost all of them in poor countries in Asia and Africa. The WHO releasing the latest data on air pollution worldwide today. According to the report, 9 out of 10 people on the planet breathe in polluted air. About a quarter of the deaths from heart disease, stroke, and lung cancer can be attributed to air pollution. This October, the institution plans to hold the first conference on air pollution and health to speed up change at a global level.